the Twilight Knights prepare to once more lay siege to the land of Mana, the younger Sunrise protagonists, after a training session, exalt Amuro for his piloting capabilities. But Amuro shows concern they don't care for him at all in the perspective of who he is as a person, which is the writer's own way of calling out the fandom believing Amuro is the best pilot without concern of anything else. As when put into context of who Amuro is as a person, well, he's not a very good one, even with his personal traumas factored in. After all, a lot of bad things in Universal Century's timeline happen because of his personal actions, preventing the needed change from taking place due to his blind adherence to the Federation being the good guys, with the Titans being a one-off exception instead of a symptom. And even then, he stuck his head in the sand a lot throughout that conflict. Though the mechanics mention in this that the new Gundam isn't in great shape right now, the one Amuro is piloting being a rush job put together to counter Neo's Zeon aggression, and is not the complete new Gundam as was intended. Which comes into play as all the aces of the Mitsurugi Alliance, Barzugilla, prepare to assault the Knights while they're shorter on manpower, their leaders wanting them to target Amuro due to him historically being less known than his rival Char. Well, yeah, the Federation did everything to suppress knowledge of Amuro due to the belief that he was a new type, due to the leadership being fearful of the idea of new types being the next stage of human evolution, and the whole, Laplace box stuff where the Federation's leadership were behind a terrorist attack that allowed them to seize power and rob it from the people to begin with. But yeah, thanks to that, and the stories the people of the era have said about Amuro's rep, their leadership wants him specifically taken out. All the enemy aces just trying to dogpile on Amuro here. And you actually get some fantastic bonuses if you have Char, the person most wronged by Amuro over the years, defend him and defeat several of the aces. You need to specifically have Char defeat Kia to unlock Kia's recruitment conditions by getting Char to earn Kia's respect, and also have Char defeat Yazan, Mask, Rockpie, Rakan, and Barara to clear all the special conditions on the stage. Beyond that, defeat enough of the aces, and Amuro will feel the pull of another Psycho Frame mobile suit in a transport near the battle. The transport containing Kampa, who Amuro does not properly condemn despite him doing more to cause harm and atrocities than Char ever did. So for Amuro to not even attempt to reason the suck speech towards him, that's off. Regardless, the Psycho Frame in question is in fact the completed New Gundam, known more commonly as the High New Gundam. The High New Gundam, I have not had the time to build this yet, originates from the alternative story version of Char's counterattack, Beltorchica's Children. And yes, the name is referencing the bitchy blonde sipping for Amuro from Zeta Gundam. Now, technically, both stories, Char's counterattack and Beltorchica's Children, are based on another of Tomino's novels, Mobile Suit Gundam High Streamer. However, Sunrise rejected just turning that novel into a series or the eventual film because it was viewed as incomprehensible. Are we seeing a pattern here yet? Sunrise basically had Tomino rewrite the story to be understandable before they'd give it the go-ahead. And the new script Tomino made for the film was also rejected, but this time by Sunrise's sponsors due to their pre-existing bad relationship with Tomino due to his actions in the past, which thus made them insist Tomino rewrite the story again into the form of the film we know today. Tomino said the reason why the sponsors rejected that original draft was because they didn't like the idea of Amuro being a family man, with Beltorchica pregnant with his child. But that is a vast oversimplification of the problem to the point it might be considered an outright lie, as no one had issue with that happening for Bright and Hayato, nor was it based on the original draft confirming Char and Amuro's deaths. Audiences would have preferred such be confirmed. It still would have been a disliked conclusion due to Amuro being the one acting deliberately ignorant of the problem Char was trying to solve, and Char going to the most extreme way inexplicably to address the problem without valid cause for him to take it that far, as remember the retcon would still be a decade off by this point. But the deaths themselves were not the issue, just the circumstances around them, and ambiguity around their deaths was not a fix for that. And no, it wasn't tied to the negative stigma that comes from the story tropes of a man going to war and abandoning his family in the conflict either. The actual issue was Beltorchika Irma was and has remained a deeply unpopular character in UC Gundam, basically from the point she was introduced, to the point audiences did not want her to have hooked up with Amuro in any way, shape, or form after the way she was depicted as acting in Zeta Gundam. While fans wanted Amuro to be with Sayla, as was the directed implication from the original series, it was accepted due to her actress being unavailable that such was unlikely to happen. So it became a long-agreed fandom thing, even in the 80s, that Amuro could be with anyone else as long as it wasn't Beltorchika. On some level, Tomino knew this, as Beltorchika's role was completely written out of the movie that was made, thus leading to the introduction of Amuro's last love interest, Sean Agi, who serves as Beltorchika's replacement. And it has been a multi-decade-long fan theory that the entire reason Hathaway murders Sean is Tomino acting spitefully to audiences with regard to their dislike of Beltorchika. Regardless, that initial script was then used as the basis for a new novelization of the film, which was named Beltorchika's Children, due to the major differences in the plot being hinged upon Beltorchika's innovation of the psychroframe, and the Suzabi new Gundams replaced with completely new and upgraded versions of their respective mechs, the Nightingale and the aforementioned High New Gundams. Though, in looking into this fact, turns out there actually wasn't a lot lost in adaptation. High Streamer, Beltorchika's Children, and Char's Counterattack all lack one essential detail to their stories. They all forget to justify Char's thought process in why he wants to drop Axis on Earth as his means of breaking the Federation's control over the Earth sphere, as opposed to implementing any other method of breaking the chains placed upon peoples of the Universal Century. That is in fact why Sunrise originally rejected High Streamer to begin with. They couldn't wrap their heads around it. Which is in turn why the stage has all those special conditions as well, for by completing them, it unlocks the secret scenario Red Comet's Dignity, which gifts Char in turn with his Nightingale unit to complement the High New Gundam, but is predicated on a plot where Judao has his turn at being a jerk to Char, with his own being contingent on him holding Char accountable for how Judao views Char mistreated Haman. Or rather, this is another case of the story choosing to place the blame on Char, because of course they would, for something he isn't responsible for, and in this case it being the horrible way Haman was treated in Zeta and Double Zeta, with Char and Haman's one-sided relationship used as the focus. In the original Zeta Gundam, Haman Karn is depicted as being sexually infatuated with Char, despite their own respective goals being at odds due to Haman being one that was indoctrinated to the goals of Zeon and wanted to put Zeon's Zabi family in a position of power over humanity, which Char opposed because of the way that these people had been indoctrinating the young Maneva Zabi into just repeating the sins of the past. Char repeatedly rejected Haman's advances as well during the years between the original Gundam and when he left Axis in 0083, which is where Judao comes in on this, as Char had to more and more extremely refuse her advances, which gave birth to the animosity between them as depicted in Zeta Gundam. As Char and Haman have a 7-year age gap between them, and the two first met when she was 14 and Char was 21, her only being 16 by the time he left Axis. So, of course, Char wasn't going to return her affections. At least it wasn't until they retconned it. What I'm referring to is Hiroyuki Kitazume's Char's Deleted Affair, Portrait of a Young Comet, a manga published in Gundam Ace from 2001 to 2009 that fills in the missing years between 0079 and 0083 from the perspective of the Zeon remnants as they occupy the Axis asteroid and fend off unprovoked assaults from the Federation, during which Haman and Char first meet, Haman presents her affections, and the manga bears the implication in it that Char for a time accepted, before breaking it off in a damaging way due to the story also focusing on Haman's radicalization by a Zeon colonel who wants to restart the war, using a distorted version of the philosophies Char's father, Zeon Zem Daikun, originally promoted to do so. So congratulations with Sunrise! You allowed one of the two most popular characters of your largest franchise to have overt pedophilic implications made towards them instead of keeping to the idea that Char had always told Haman that he just wasn't into her, and made it her be the one with the legitimate problem. And no, I don't care about what ages of consent in Japan are in this case, as they are not justifying that shit here. But you know how I know that that works as a motivation and character arc? Because that's Salia's storyline in Cross Ange. Hell, Salia even shares young Haman's freaking hairstyle, but it's better justified because Jill actually did take advantage of Salia's affections for her own ends, while never intending to actually get in a relationship with a younger woman due to Jill's own issues. Though, if anything, Char's part in this is more like Kaji Ryoji's from Evangelion towards Asuka Soryu, where he neither can nor wants to return the younger woman's affections, and she won't stop trying to flirt with him. The best thing that came from Char's deleted affair, however, was the confirmation of one detail: that the Federation had always remained the aggressor and sent fleet after fleet out to attack Zeon remnants that had fled to Axis from the original Side 3 Zeon colonies after the war. They were never, at any point, left alone to reconsider their actions, which thus leads to the actions of the Zeon forces in playing their parts in both the Delaz fleet incident depicted in Gundam 0083, and eventually moving Axis back into Earth orbit to play part in Zeta's events. Even as it then begs the question of how those at Axis were even allowed to build up their forces enough to become a threat during Zeta if the assaults against them never stopped. Regardless, Char's deleted affair's canonicity has become a point of contention due to its sequel, Zeta Gundam Define, a manga retelling of Zeta Gundam that diverges a lot from the anime or the A New Translation movies, but in turn actively calls back to CDA. Some things outside of it count or refer to it as expansion material in the same way that scene from the Zeta PS1 game is. Others disregard it because of the pedophilic implications, but it's a mess trying to make a definitive statement due to how tie-in media to the Gundam anime can vary widely in its explicit canonicity. In the AU timelines, it's easier to say what is and what isn't, but just so much of the side stories for UC Gundam are retroactive and bad for what was previously canon, that there's a lot more people want to disregard. Ergo, why Unicorn got animated to confirm it canon. So yeah, that's the context of Judao's issue with Char, that he didn't respect Haman's feelings for him. But he doesn't understand that he legitimately could not, and Haman refused to accept no. So Judao's bias against Char on Haman's behalf is complete bullshit, as Judao's entire attitude throughout this entire stage is Judao declaring that Char should have sexually assaulted a minor. It's not like I agree with every decision Char ever made. Of course the man made a ton of mistakes. Everything involving Garmazabi, that was a mistake. Not trying to clear the error more with Amuro during Zeta, big one as well. Not staying with Camille to help him recover, or even check in with him before beginning the Abscess Drop plan after continuity for the Gundam series started to make that a big contingent issue. That is a big, big, big mistake. And I could name more. But the reason I tend to take his side in regards to a lot of these events where they scapegoat him is no one else will! And the entire reason Char asked Judao and also Toby all along is they're the two from his time he's not interacted much with and wants to get to know them so he knows how to best help them. But Judao doesn't want to listen due to his prejudice, so charges in without listening to orders as they investigate a recently attacked town. The stage also permitting the Double Zeta and Crossbone Gundams to get workouts of their recently upgraded mechs. The Double Zeta getting its full armor gear, and the Crossbone its full cloth equipment if you hadn't grabbed it before. Judao's actions put him in the line of fire as reinforcements arrive, leading to Char putting himself in harm's way to protect Judao, and the Sazabi taking significant damage. Which Judao completely fucks up the understanding of, thinking it's all about them not wanting to show weakness to the point that people get the wrong idea of them, and that's why he and Haman didn't work out. No, you idiot! She was too young for him and he's not a fucking groomer! And that strength narrative doesn't make sense because despite his plans, Char's one of the most straightforward characters in UC Gundam. People just don't understand him because they're deliberately written to be idiots or they're short-sightedly ignorant of what he has perspective to from having seen more than the bubble these other characters' little lives have been. Char's forced to retreat, but somehow Sparrow knows the location of another unit he can pilot. That happens to be the Nightingale. How Sparrow knew of it is anyone's guess, but the assaulting forces credit Kappa for constructing it from their MS archives. Though, unfortunately, unlike the Hainu Gundam, the Nightingale is actually a downgrade from the Sazabi for Char, it having a very limited moveset, most of which are underpowered in comparison to the Sazabi, despite the Nightingale having been sold as an improved version of the Sazabi. Granted, the Nightingale overall is way too bulky for its own good and point, since its construction basically makes it act as a full armor equipment version of the predecessor mech. The Hainu has a more balanced compare-contrast with the original Nu, but yeah, if they had just changed the backpack on the Sazabi to hold more remote weapon funnels, it'd probably outdo the Nightingale, as it's just too big. Like, I own the RE100 of it, and it's stupid huge. But the irony of this is, I actually really like the Hainu Gundam. Seriously, it's one of my favorite UC Gundam-related units from an aesthetic perspective, and a lot more balanced in most regards to the normal Nu, even though the Hainu has all sorts of problems with regards to actually storing its weapons. And again, that's what the heavy weapons variants are for. More DLC missions are available at this point, the first following up with Amuro stuff from earlier about the younger pilots only knowing him as a pilot and not a person, when Amuro views himself as more of an engineer. Yeah, that's an easily forgotten part of his character, as it's seen so rarely in the actual anime. He was the mechanic for the Arc 78, as they were short-handed, yes. The apocryphal material mentions it on occasion as well, and his custom-designed Haru of course became so bafflingly popular that it became Sunrise's mascot character. But main series content? It is barely seen in 0079 as that distinct. Hell, the other pilots in that series also help service their own mecha. But if you want an Apocrypha example, Amuro apparently was the in-universe designer of the new Gundam, at least on a conceptual level, with Anaheim Electronics taking it from there to actually develop it, and also installed the Psycho-Frame technology that Char gave them for Amuro. So, that's more a case of he was involved, not he was responsible, or a chief designer on the project, which should belong to others. Kinda like how Camille gave the design ideas for the Zeta Gundam, but the project was already underway before him, which allowed for the machines to be developed in a few months, when that normally takes a lot longer. Still, it acts as the framing device for this stage, as he takes more of the younger pilots out on a differing patrol, and encounter a group of Reguild Century pilots utilizing reproductions of varied mechas of the era, with Amuro educating them on the history of their respective mechs from his personal experience with them, while he gives advice on the pros and cons of the mecha of his companions, as well as giving the Hainu Gundam a greater collection of shakedown tests towards its performance.
仕掛けるぞ! 動力部に当てればいけ
I actually do like this stage, as I'm obviously a bit passionate about media lore consistency, so writing a character in character commenting on mechs they've faced is something I really do like. But the framing device is where I ended up being more baffled, as that's more an issue of the character trait and passion that is reliant on not being one that had been as emphasized in depiction of the character. Still, that is one of the pros of the SRW series, to promote and spotlight those more obscure elements instead of just rewriting a depiction wholesale, which ironically is the problem this game keeps running into. Plus, I like the speculation Amuro has at the end of, what would Amuro have done with his life if Tamino was not so insistent on creating situations to deliberately kill him and Char off like he wanted to do since 1979? And him possibly being an educator or test pilot for new advances? Those are ones I can at very least get behind. The next DLC stage focuses on Masaki Andoh, and how stressed out he is, which he's apparently been dealing with for a while. I mean, that'd make more sense if you got the pre-order DLC stage version of Masaki, but from context of the later purchase version, and those not aware that Masaki's been getting isekai'd repeatedly to play part in the story of dozens of Super Robot Wars games, which have all taken a toll on his psyche, that is not as understandable. But this also highlights a recurring problem with the DLC missions in this game, in that the setup for so many of them is a member of the cast getting too far stressed out, and other members doing something with them to bleed that stress. We had that with the pizza run, and with Sally's magical girl fantasy. And my belief is it's once again the problem of the story engine of the game not permitting them to take advantage of many of the traits of the given setting for which to tell extra stories with a greater variety. So we're just filling the stage with the repetitions of the same idea, just with different casts for the stock tale focused upon, with them inevitably all going on recon to set it off. This time Masaki's stress has led him to, for some reason, think Hero's got some beef with him due to how reserved the wing pilot is. The recon assignment intended to get them to work it out through competing for kills against a group of rogue rune golems, where it's even more shown that it's Masaki that has this odd problem, with it being Zex that comes in as backup to just literally tear Masaki down for the attitude he's been displaying, and making the incident an example to publicly shame him for it. That's a bit extreme, but if it would prevent a fatality of a member of the team, not an unwarranted one. It's just the stage is really bad at explaining why they even began to feud to begin with, nor why at the end they're suddenly united against not just Zex, but the ones who got him in trouble in the first place. And no, I don't think that the fact that Hikaru Midorikawa voices both characters really factored into that here. Lastly for this set is another Dream Battle simulation mission against all the bosses we faced in this third of the game, to train the group against plausible forces they could end up facing going forward in a worst possible scenario, which they are about to hit, but not in a way any of them are expecting. For you see, I skipped something earlier regarding Stupid Hair, for as the route split ended, he ended up obtaining by chance a new ally, one that is capable of helping him and Gargoyle with their end goals. Or rather, two of them. The first of which is Shot Weapon, the true villain of Aura Battler Dunbine, who was the one who created the Aura machines that facilitated Drake Luff's war, all out of his own genius ambition. And he cares more about his research to understand and create new things greater than before than he does control, which is a different expression of the god complex that complements Embryo's own. But while they complement each other in a way different than Leonard from Fullmetal Panic did in V, well, the fact Embryo needs a researcher to begin with is a bit suspect, considering Embryo is, or at least started out as, a scientist and researcher himself. While yes, there are so many fields of science that it is implausible to think one can do all of them with any competency, well, Stupid Hair has literally been in this realm for centuries, so it would have had the time to investigate the things that Shot Weapon, by comparison, has only had at most months, maybe a year to look at himself. Like, maybe Stupid Hair supplied him the data so a scientist of a different specialty than his own could look over his own findings to confirm them, especially since Shot used science with fantasy beasts and magic to create the Aura machines to begin with, and he has his own experiences with other dimensional realms. But it always felt odd to see Embryo deferring to Shot in matters of science. Regardless, it's Shot's conclusion that has them unnerved, and also brings in the other new executive member of this little alliance, as Shot has uncovered that Alworth is not in fact an alternate universe parallel Earth, but a world that has been artificially created and exists in a rift between the three Earths we've been dealing with, that should be instead described as existing at a nexus point between the living realm and the point which exists beyond the Veil of Death. Which admittedly doesn't make the most sense, as if the worlds of peace, war, and revolution exist in entirely separate universes, and they do, this is not a Super Robot Wars V or even Xenoblade Chronicle situation, then their own afterlives should not be connected for Alworth to intersect with them, but isolated from one another inside their own universes. The only other way that would make sense is if Alworth is in a rift between universes that happens to coincide with these universes and is parasitically draining the populace of them, so snaps up individuals who are in their moment of death, as we've been seeing, and their transportation heals any injuries they may have had, as opposed to dragging them back from beyond death. After all, it's hard to miss someone has been abducted when you believe them dead to start with. But regardless, it allows for the introduction of the newest antagonist in all of this,
そんな。
大きくなったわね、ルルーシュ。
Her Royal Highness, wife of Emperor Charles Z. Britannia, Empress Consort Marianne V. Britannia, also known as Lelouch's mother. And this reveal right here, this is why I did not in any way, shape, or form allude to her in the Code Geass review, that Lelouch's mom, the woman murdered by his uncle that put him on his path as rebel leader and liberator, was secretly one of the biggest actual antagonists of the series, with her supporting her husband even beyond death, thanks to her own Geass power given by CC that allowed her the power to possess others' bodies, and the secret conspirator CC communicated with through her contract that told them everything Lelouch was doing behind his back to thwart it. Like, how do you explain that to someone not inducted to the series? That everything Lelouch was driven to do was founded upon a lie not of his own making, but that of his parents, and CC was ratting him out all along.
まさかゼロをやめるだけなら簡単だ。そんなロマンティックな話じゃないさ。しかしこのままでは黒の騎士団もおしまいだな。あ、ナナリンのためのゼロ。ルルーシュはそう言っていたよ、マリアンナ。
In Code Geass's backstory, Marianne was a young girl who witnessed her family being murdered, with her eventually falling into the ranks of the Britannian military, and specifically into alliance with the younger Charles Z. Britannia, who at the time was plotting his own rise to power by using his own memory-altering Geass to pit Charles's family against each other in an event known as the Emblem of Blood. Marianne became Charles' personal knight, and assisted in both that rise and the conquest of new areas for Britannia to rule, with her piloting the first true nightmare frame of the series, as Charles' most loyal and sycophantic follower, only rivaled by Charles' other knight, Bismarck Waldston, who himself was in love with Marianne. But by that point, Marianne was so smitten with Charles, she didn't give him the time of day. Her actions charmed the Britannian commoners, as her skills from out of nowhere had allowed her to rise to the highest seat of power she could, thus reinforcing the greatest lie Britannia ever told, the implication they could rise in status as well. Though that led to her being hated by every other non-military member of the nobility, including the other consorts that viewed her as being the favored wife, despite earning her place there more than any of the others simply through deed. Though the favor she held more had to do with what she brought to Charles that no other did, that being her own contract with CC as a Geass user, which she'd held since not long after her family's death, and that in turn made possible Charles' greater plans and research into the powers of Code and Geass that made her invaluable to them to keep around and a larger part of their grander schemes. But that opinion was not shared. Charles' brother, Victor Z. Britannia, also known as VV, murdered Marianne due to, in his view, Charles actually loving Marianne more than him, so betrayed them both in killing her. The death triggering Marianne's own Geass, whose power allowed her to possess others' bodies, and her doing so to Anya Allstride, who at the time was living with the V. Britannias to undergo instruction under Marianne. And once Marianne awoke in Anya's body, immediately reported what happened to Charles, forcing him to perform a cover-up, and all of them collaborating in the resultant aftermath. Them deliberately acting to maim Nunnally to rob her of her legs and sight in order to frame Marianne's death as the act of terrorists. And in Code Geass's expanded material, VV then furthered this masquerade by performing copycat attacks on Charles's other consorts, one of them being done on Maribel Mel Britannia's home to kill Maribel's mom and abduct her sister, likewise setting up the events of the Oz the Reflection manga. They killed any investigation into Marianne's death and these other incidents to disguise this fact, helped in turn by the nobles that despised Marianne and the upward social mobility she had achieved, which thus set Lelouch off into confronting his bastard of a sperm donor, him drawing attention to their cover-up, and the appearance of Charles' weakness in allowing those under his protection to be killed and maimed without retaliation, and that being what made them disown him had thrown him away to Japan, where they were already planning to invade even at the time he arrived there. Suffice it to say, as I got into a bit during the main Code Geass review, the fact that a Britannian commoner, we think there's some conflicted material out there that implies Marianne had French origin, ergo Lelouch's Lamperouge pseudonym, could rise to such heights and yet be so despised as an unacceptable anomaly in Britannia's caste system, is another reason why Suzaku's scheme would have never worked on its own, as the entire reason the two met was a result of that systematic rejection of non-nobles moving above their stations. So think of a number trying that. No, he only rose as high as he did through cronyism during a time of conflict, not acknowledged merit of his skill or identity as a person. Had Lelouch done nothing, as Suzaku kept insisting, so Suzaku could have used the system to change things, he would have never gotten recognition by anyone in power to then do anything. There is no point in Code Geass' story where Suzaku's position is proven factual, or any argument he makes is in any way backed up. But yeah, the beginning attacks on Japan that targeted where Lelouch and Nunnally were first, intentionally done to martyr them and sweep the greater incident under a rug to make those invested in it turn their attention to every outsider that may cause harm instead of inwards where the perpetrator really was. All while Marianne used Anya's body as a puppet to continue assisting Charles. Every time Marianne took control, robbing Anya of the stretches of time from her memory, which left her fractured as a person and unable to grow up, thus leading to her emotional stagnation as every important decision in her life was dictated by the one who was possessing her, leading to Anya eventually joining Charles' personal knights, the Knights of the Round, so Marianne could once more overtly serve her husband. Irony in all this being, had they just created a fake terrorist group to frame for all this, they likely could have prevented Lelouch going full rebel. But then again, that is why we have Maribel's story, to show what could have been had Charles not deliberately created his own worst enemy. Then again, this entire plot I am explaining, yeah, it is all 1000% facilitated by a collection of retcons introduced in Code Geass R2. This was not intended from the start of the series, at least not all of it, but invented when they got to R2 as they needed to make the supernatural mythos plot actually have relevance to the story, because Ichiro Okuuchi and Goro Taniguchi had written themselves into a corner regarding the powers of Code and Geass thanks to their forced creation of CC, as despite creating her in the first place to provide Lelouch with his Geass, everything relating to CC had done nothing but eat time and drag the entire production down, thanks to her taking focus away from characters they needed to spend time on to justify the direction of the main revolution narrative. To continue to justify her presence, despite her doing nothing for the story, they needed her to tie into one of the major climaxes of the narrative. And in that context, it makes sense to make Marianne a Geass user and CC's previous contractor, to explain why she would then stalk Lelouch for years before contracting with him, and be invested more than her other contractors with his survival. Because it was never about Lelouch or gaining affection from him, it was always about securing a means by which to obtain her own death. So, she spied on him for them. As if Lelouch didn't kill her, for that betrayal or not, his parents would. To them, Lelouch, solely because of his own survival against expectations, was a means for them to chain CC down long enough for them to get their big scheme ready to go, and the information CC gave them behind Lelouch's back, making them aware of exactly when and where it would be best to screw him over. Once again, this, because of R2, is the canonical reason why Charles did not object to forming Euphemia's special administrative zone, despite it being against his doctrine. He and his group of co-conspirators already planned for its failure to push forward their own agenda, and in doing so, neuter Lelouch's rebellion outright. But to continue my thesis about R2's story being written backwards with respect for the need of an event preceding its cause, and the ending being decided before anything else about the series being written, That then required the creation of Anya to be Marianne's host body. And for Anya to have relevance to the story, that then required the invention of the Knights of the Round as special ace pilots, which were then used as additional barriers towards the progress of Lelouch's campaign against Britannia beyond just Suzaku, who himself is promoted into their ranks as representing the face of the oppression of the Empire, with the irony being that most of the Knights of the Round just ended up being cannon fodder. And that all being the reason why the Knights of the Round weren't mentioned in R1 despite their supposed prominence. They weren't planned to exist originally. Thus, there isn't a knight for every position, nor do the ones that were created have significant characterization in the main material, and only get such in later side material. They were not made to be characters, but plot points that enabled other plot points. And if you do look back, you won't hear them referred to by that name until R2. Lelouch in R1 referred to his mother's position as a Knight of the Round as a Knight of Honor, as the concept of the rounds had not been written into the story yet. This is also why fan favorite Nanette Amagram was added to their roster and is seen in R2 after her first appearance in the Lost Colors game. They needed bodies to fill out their ranks, so grandfathered in the character despite that now introducing the question of whether the game itself was canon or not. But by proxy of this, due to her being popular, they couldn't defame Nanette's character by having her go against Lelouch when the knights would later die against either Callan or Suzaku. So the staff then had to create another knight atop that to be the really oppressively classist anti-number one later on as the Sacrificial Lamb, where the side material would then later characterize that character as not being as anti-number at all, which then pissed off people who became fans of that character too from reading the manga. As discussed before, Code Geass's story becomes a mess of contradictions due to so much of it not being thought out as a progressing narrative, and everything that informs the greater story direction being divested in side material the movies then consequently ignored. And this all isn't made any better in the media surrounding the series either. Code Geass's original manga adaptation of the story doesn't use the Knights of the Round at all, them making the adaptation exceedingly and unnecessarily convoluted by their entire exclusion of the nightmares from the story, despite their role being Marianne's entire wheelhouse of influence and why she even grew to power to begin with. And yet making Valletta Nu be Marianne's host instead, which in turn invokes so many logistical problems I can't even name all of them. But the bottom line of why such was done that way was because Valletta was a pre-existing character, so it made things easy in rushing the adaptation of the tale to make her Marianne's victim in that version. At best, all that adaptation did was further highlight the one truth of Charles and Marianne the anime presents. They only really cared about themselves and their goals, and everyone else was expendable, including their children. Them uncaring of Lelouch and Nunnally's state of being because it didn't matter to them. Not in the face of the Ragnarok connection plan they had spent decades working towards, that they believed would strike and disperse the afterlife known as the collective unconsciousness of humanity, which they believed would kill God and prevent the souls of the dead and living to intermingle to the point that death as a concept would lose all meaning, and thus allow the truth of the world to finally be laid bare, despite the very deceptions they were responsible for birthing in the first place, which facilitated the worst and most malicious of those lies. Hell, you have third reinforcement of that point in the Nightmare of Nunnally manga, where they try to use Nunnally herself as a focal point for this same plan instead of CC, with the known risk it'd kill her, as their plan was always more important. Thus, it didn't matter who they sacrificed, didn't matter who they claimed to love died. As long as they completed their plan, the border between life and death would end, and they'd get them all back. And thus, they didn't care about the collateral damage along the way, as all such would do was make the consciousness of humanity so yearn for the past that they'd subconsciously embrace what Charles was doing regardless of how wrong it was. But in the end, all they actually succeeded in doing is actually lose all concept of empathy that allows people to connect with and understand the truths of one another despite the barriers that may exist between them, which is what drove Code Geass's Earth into such a deplorable state. This is what Suzaku's role model for his actions was despite them being descriptive of the very people he claimed to despise in its condemnations of Lelouch. Those who are completely incapable of caring for others, and bear the very same sociopathy Lelouch loathed to the point that when this truth was laid bare, he rejected the very mother whose memory he put on a pedestal. As everything good in the world she represented, it was all nothing but the very lies his parents seemed to hate. And that's what you should take away from them at the end. Charles, Vivi, and Marianne's goal was to destroy the world of lies that they viewed human existence as, and used those very same liars to facilitate their schemes, not understanding that their very actions and who they exalted were why it had become worse than what they believed it to be to justify that position. And they were incapable of understanding the truth of what, where, why, how, and whom they had wronged.
皆いずれ分かる時が来る。そんな時は来ない。計画を優先したお前たちはもう俺たちが生きていようと死んでいようと関係がなかったんだ。だから捨てた。自己満足の言い訳だけ残して。
それは違うわ。
今言っただろ。死んだ人とも一つになれると。未来なんか見ていないんだ。未来はラグナレクの接続。その先にあるナナリーの言った優しい世界。違う。お前たちが言っているのは自分に優しい世界だ。お前たちは知っているのか、ナナリーの笑顔の意味を。
笑顔？
ナナリーは目も見えず歩くこともできなかった。だから世の中には自分一人ではできないこともあるって知っていたんだよ。ナナリーの笑顔はせめてもの感謝の気持ちなんだ。そのようなごまかしこそがそれを嘘だとは言わせない。言わせてなるものか。現実を見ることもなく高みに立って俺たちを楽しげに観察して。ふざけるな。事実は一つだけだ。お前たち親は俺とナナリーを捨てたんだよ。
And that is the linchpin in this. They are the liars who perpetuated lies because they could not accept the reality of their responsibility in what they were doing, and facilitating nothing but a delusion that God was to blame for what they did and what they suffered because of it. For it is the final condemnation of why Suzaku's way of doing things, changing the system from within, would have never worked, and his deeds are nothing but self-aggrandizing moral cowardice. As the empire he fought for was led by a man with the same goals he claimed to have, and he did nothing to change anything despite the power of the position he held to do so. People think Lelouch became the very father he hated by the end? No, Suzaku has more in common with Charles due to him using everyone he claims to care for to further his own goals. If anything, thanks to Resurrection, Lelouch was turned into the VV of the new generation, which is vastly worse. Instead of the movie using its story to break this cycle of children that grow up to be the very people they hate and fought against. 'Cause I hate that shit when it's done to characters that were legitimately trying to fix the problem of their world with awareness of what the problem is. But this also answered one of the major questions of CC's actions as well. For intermittently in the story, CC would be shown talking through her code to another person, which is revealed to be Marianne. CC actively betraying Lelouch's trust and telling Marianne everything about what her son was doing, thus permitting them knowledge of all the Black Knight's activities. CC playing both sides as a means to get what she most desperately wanted. Her doing so is so baked into the series that this reveal recontextualizes all of CC's actions as spending the story stabbing Lelouch in the back without him even realizing it. She is one of the characters most harmed by those revelations which happen solely to validate her presence in the story. And yet paradoxically, she is the least held accountable for it alongside Suzaku. And just think about that for a moment. You've heard me spend numerous videos bashing Suzaku, and there are several characters whose depictions are almost as harmed along our two story. Ogi, Cornelia, and Nina being common names thrown around as targets for bashing as there's never a proper response inside the series where they pay for their own sins. Hell, I've heard Nunnally more condemned for how easily she's led astray in R2 into literally blindly murdering millions. But when it comes to CC, there's an even more enormous, egregious blind spot regarding how she literally knows the answers to everything from the start and refuses to tell Lelouch any of it. The sole excuse being that she was not originally written as possessing the information she does, as everything relating to her was not planned out in advance, but were a collection of mystery boxes. But the second they made it so she was tied into this greater plot, that instantly invokes the problem of her withholding that information while spying against him. And that retcon damns her.
And don't say I didn't. You didn't just. Frickin' dirtlers!
And this in specific, is why there is such rejection of the movie timeline's attempts to promote CC into the role of a love interest for Lelouch. Because she is the biggest traitor in the story when it comes to her association with him. Callan botched this twice, and there are people who think she doesn't deserve a relationship with him as consequence. And you know what? There is a valid argument that can be made there, as relationships are built on trust. And trust is what Lelouch most struggles with. Another one associated with that is, in the wake of the revelations about Marianne, and in context to Lelouch's own loathing of his father, that he likely would not have wanted to repeat the actions of his sperm donor with regards to entering a relationship with a woman that is very much like his mother. Though for that to hold water, it would have required Callan to also be present during the final confrontation with Charles and Marianne, so that comparison could be invoked. Lelouch to actively see it, comment on it, and then force a separation of them to avoid such. The problem with doing things that way, however, is it would have even more robbed Callan of her own agency as a person than the series already had, as there is no valid way to separate them once Callan is in the know, and has the opportunity to force Lelouch into a corner where he'd have to explain himself, that would resultantly shatter the barriers keeping them apart. Moreover, that she betrayed him too much argument even more condemns CC because of how she's canonically playing both sides to get what she wants and running on Lelouch's actions to his mom.
Whose side are you on?
I'm on my side. And if you're smart, you'll keep your mouth shut.
And thus, even in the movie timeline where they end on them together, it doesn't work, as she actively chose to betray him and keep secrets from him which he deserved to know, with full awareness of what she was doing, and to a degree where it is not forgivable. That is not the foundation of a mutually beneficial or respectful relationship. That's not even the foundation of a partnership, or the work of accomplices, or even looking out for another's best interests due to what she knew and withheld, causing him to make the wrong decisions and be exploited as consequence. This is what is done when you are using someone without any care towards their emotional well-being or future. The second Okuchi and Taniguchi did this, that instantly created the fandom's rejection of CC as a canonical paramour, as this is something you cannot get past. Which is why I say they wrote themselves into a corner with her, as in trying to make her an enigmatic presence to cover up the fact she wasn't intended to be part of the story to begin with, they had to make good on all of those mystery boxes. And as a consequence, a dead woman was made a villain as an afterthought uncaring of the ramifications for doing so, just to make this character have relevance as more than the story device that she never escapes being. You'll wonder why I'm not a fan of CC? This is it. Ironically, Okuchi to some extent would recognize this, as Prospera Mercury in Gundam the Witch from Mercury is a version of Marianne's character that is fully actualized from start to finish as a villainous figure, and what one of her mentality would look like if she were allowed to exploit and indoctrinate her kids to be used for her own machinations. I actually consider Prospera to be a better mom than Marianne is, however, because for all the horrible things she does, they're actually all done for her kids, and she actually did seem to generally give a damn about her daughter Suletta's well-being as more than just a thing to be used, and in fact begins to actively exclude her from being used in her plans the second it is possible for her to do so. And it's Prospera losing her husband and first daughter that validates why she goes off the deep end to show she has understandable reasons why she takes things too far, and starts to care more about the plan than her children over time. These are things Marianne does not have, as Marianne's character as executed is nothing but an afterthought. A woman without agency that is made to abandon her children because that is the place the narrative needs her to be in order to march her son to his own execution. But in Super Robot Wars X, this is the genius kernel of an idea finally showing itself over 2/3 of the way into the game. Marianne's revelation as a villain in Code Geass was such a half-assed last-minute retcon that there is so little done with her, so she is not validated as more than an accessory hanger-on to the actions of other characters. She has no agency of her own as a villain, which is hilariously ironic because of her role in robbing agency from Anya's life. Legitimately, like a lot of the supernatural mythos arc in Code Geass, you could omit Marianne as possessing spirit from Code Geass' story, and would affect nothing important, as nothing important is done with it, and it does not exist for the story's sake, but as a failed attempt to validate CC. So what X does is what all post-story extensions for a series should do in Super Robot Wars. Look at what the story shortcomings are, and what developments are left hanging, and build additional story upon it to fix and address that. And thus, we get Marianne as a central antagonist for the next stretch of the game. This decision alone is what validates this game as having purpose and merit in existing, regardless of the faults I have been showcasing. As no other Code Geass related media, even the mobile games, in any way comes close to attempting this. Fanfic writers have done more to flesh out Marianne's character than anything else Sunrise has approached. And I'll point it out again. SRWX came out the year before Resurrection did. Yet for as little as it focuses on their content, it provides a far better experience for closure of its cast than Resurrection even pretended to, because it tries to answer the question of what more story is there to tell, instead of making up an entirely new antagonist where the plot that leads up to them being dealt with ends up flying in the face of the thematic purpose the preceding series even fucking had, and fucks up showing that the setting will be alright without the protagonist regaining their prior role. And I genuinely loathe how this latter approach is so common in events that return to do more with a concluded story. Anyways, Marianne being here in X is the evidence Embryo and Shot needed to validate their theory, as Marianne even now is a spirit, but in Alworth she can take on a corporeal form again. That only works if Alworth is not restrained by the same rules that govern life and death as the original ones did. And for those considering the implications of that with regards to other series, no, they're not resurrecting Kamina from the dead. Marianne alone has the ability to spectate like this because of her Geass. Though as the next stage proper does begin, we do get more of why I and others consider and treat Anj as Lelouch and Callan's spiritual daughter, as their enemies both have the same ultimate goals, to remake the world in their image. And that's why Marianne has ultimately allied with Embryo here, as what Stupid Hair is doing can't get her husband back from beyond the veil of death that he was dragged to when the collective unconsciousness rejected him at the height of the Ragnarok connection after Lelouch intervened and performed his miracle that broke their hold over it. Admittedly, the presumption in Code Geass originally was the collective unconsciousness rejection of Charles and Marianne's plan made it so they were not consumed by the realm as spirits, but they were erased from existence entirely as they could not be forced to become parts of the realm thanks to Marianne's Geass, and Charles by that point possessing his own code, which makes them entirely independent of it. Thus, to get rid of them, they needed to sever their existence from it. So, yeah, fate worse than death. X isn't quite doing that. Just confirming Charles is normal dead, but it's another of the things fans had issue with regarding Resurrection, as Charles' spirit being part of the collective unconsciousness is suddenly what is keeping Lelouch's mind from returning to his body, when that doesn't work from everything that had been presented about that realm previously. A code bearer could feasibly do that, but to kill Charles, you have to remove his code, and if he is dead, he no longer has access to the powers over a realm a code would give him. Resurrection remains full of those sorts of logical paradoxes solely because it refuses to explain and justify itself. Regardless, this is the point where we have the big assault on Mitsurugi and all of their allied forces at the capital of the kingdom. And I just fucking hate this stage, as it is the culmination of X treating the Cross-Ange cast as afterthoughts. The petty reasoning Ursula, Chris, and Celia made to come under Stupid Hair's thrall, coming back to even more bite them and make them look terrible. Ursula saying that she was convinced to fight for a future where the children she would looked after wouldn't have to fight as she did, but we were already doing that! And Stupid Hair was behind why they were fighting and dying meaninglessly to begin with. We had already gotten into an alliance with the dragons Arsenal had been attacking, meaning there would have been an end to the hostilities once they took down Mitsurugi and Embryo, who she is now fighting for!
Haven't you been paying any attention today?
And again, in Cross-Ange's original story, Ursula was the reasonable one on this. She made her deal with Embryo because in the moment, those children were murdered. He approached her and offered to bring them back from the dead and save them, completely unaware that he was behind everything. And he fulfilled his end of the bargain, which ensured her loyalty until he showed to her that he didn't actually give a damn and let them die again as a consequence of his orders, which she herself committed. Here, she knew what his role was thanks to everything else they'd experienced, and she still sided with him just by implying he might make their lives better if she stopped being part of the forces that had already promised to fix the world like she wanted. It's like, this is the same shit I was talking about with Kogias and Suzaku's actions as well. How the fuck do you come back from that? And that comparison not made any better by Karen Strassman, Callan's English actress, voicing Ursula in Cross-Ange's dub as well. Chris is arguably just as bad if not worse, as once more the entire reason why Chris defected is Embryo saved her and treated her like a cherished friend instead of the doormat she viewed herself being treated as by Hilda and Rosalie. In the original story and V, the two reflect on how they acted and want to generally make amends and perform overtures to that effect, to the point Rosalie generally puts her life on the line to make up for her failures to someone she genuinely loves. But in X, they just deride that as petty jealousy and subsequently bully her into switching sides again without ever admitting to any faults of their own that caused Chris's feelings of worthlessness to begin with that her face heel turn was contingent on. And I don't even have the words for how fucked up that is that X's attempted racy sex speeches time and again backfire so horrifically. And I hate that it's Lelouch that is delivering it, considering his own past actions of deliberately disregarding the feelings of those who love him, and usually in favor of being around or helping those that treat him like shit. With Hilda at this point stealing the Theodora Ragna mail from Chris so she gets her final mech upgrade for that game. And Hilda went from her original glaive to her second unit, an arquebus, and yes, I still have trouble saying that, only 8 stages ago. 5 if you do not count the DLC, and 3 if you don't count the special stages. Do you see why I consider this so poorly balanced? I've explained ways already that this would have been remedied, and made all the worse as the stage isn't even focused properly on them either. Toro coming in to challenge Waltrue because reasons, instead of permitting the proper exploration of why the 3 allies went bad, and then reforming them through acknowledgement of their feelings and acknowledgement of their agency. The game tries to frame it as even friends sometimes have disputes and arguments between them to try and tie what's going on with Toro to these events, but it fails in this facet because what caused the girls to change allegiances before were far more serious than the petty disagreements X turns them into, and tied into their societal victimization that this is not being respectful towards, thanks to the Cross-Ange story once again being screwed over thanks to its exploitation for other series. How V handled this near perfectly without respect to nearly every series it included, and it have X screw this up so badly, frankly baffles me. Like, even if you are among those that don't like Cross-Ange, and fair enough, if you are, I've explained ad nauseum where the problems with it lies, it doesn't deserve this, as the SRW games redux of the series it includes is supposed to be depicting them in their best lights and fix what audiences found wrong with them. That X is deliberately tearing down some it includes to make others look good by comparison does it and those series no favors. I might rag on UC series, but they actually did do the things I am critical of if one pays attention. But to intentionally misrepresent what they did, that helps no one. Joe also joins us at this point, him telling Toro to think about what's really important to him, and Anj infiltrates the Capitol building to put an end to her brother, only for Stupid Hair to kill him in her stead, as is canon, as an engagement gift. Because of course, as said, Stupid Hair is obsessed with her. He tries his mental domination thing on her to make her submit, Salia stopping it as she wants to be the one to dom Anj. Not like that. To prove her worth. But if any paramour is going to make or let you deliberately fight over his affections as if they are all conditional, then that's not a sign that they actually give a damn about you. Especially in a situation where the guy was deliberately building a harem, so Salia would have known going in that she wouldn't be the only one showered in affection. Again, this works in the original series because Embryo came in as the savior to these women in their moment of death, so they aren't allowed to see the full consequences of them taking it until later. But here, it's been part of the upfront deal, so each of them coming to the realization that they made a mistake is far less effective, as they've railroaded into making an out-of-character action without cause. Hell, Salia's doesn't even allow her to wake up on her own, as Stupid Hair just discards her prematurely, when he still needs her, and should be trying to curry favor with her, as he still needs pilots for the Ragnamales for his scheme. That's why he tried to recruit them all to begin with. So him just throwing her away as the impetus for her to wake up when Jill comes in to save her and apologize is again an example of Stupid Hair's actions making no sense in this game. Oh, and he also kills Dakeem Barton when he blows up Misurugi's Capitol building. Why are the Gundam Wing cast here again outside of doing direct homages to a much better game? Because they basically don't do anything else. We blow up Embryo. He'll be back. Sala's allies working to get Aura free from the main tower so that part of Anja's story is dealt with, and Anja attempts to reveal the truth to her people to try and convince them of the atrocities they've been committing, but is prevented by Selric stepping in, as he warns them, shouldn't they be running? As the reason why the Buddy Complex antagonists weren't part of this was because they had a doomsday weapon pointed at the Mitsurugi capital, it being called the Nectar Cannon. Because, of course, in a Sunrise Real Robot anime, there'd be one last major doomsday weapon to deal with. Sometimes you can get multiple incarnations of them in a row. Fortunately, their dragon allies were able to release Aura just in time for her to raise a barrier and prevent anyone in the capital from being vaporized in the attack. The time the energy takes to dissipate, allowing the Cross-Anj cast more time to reconcile. But also see the entire land of Mana is so corrupted from the generations of Stupid Hair's indoctrination that no one here is worth saving or fighting for, as they represent Embryo's actual living failure to make a better society. Thus, the lot of them cut their ties and leave, letting the designer homunculi come to realize the truth they've ignored on their own as their world collapses around them. However, Zogilla cannot be left alone with their superweapon, the Knights heading out immediately to deal with it being guarded by Bison and a Hina that has been so drugged and mind-screwed by the Dominator coupling system that she's been turned into little more than a doll. And every member of the Zogillan forces is perfectly okay with this. Now, while I have no proof of this, I feel like why Salia, Ursha, and Chris's arc as depicted in this game was so mishandled was because that way it would distract from the awful things Buddy Complex depicts without realization, and thus make it seem not as bad by comparison. As what Zogilla just did, that is canon, and that is worse than anything Cross-Anj ever did. Why? Because they never once said what Embryo was doing was okay, whereas these characters are enabling and justifying the very actions that Cross-Anj showcased as end-boss evil. It tries to make you feel bad for Bison he's had to take things this far, and basically ignores that Hina, who he views as his to do with as he pleases, he is just enslaved. And considering he's sexually attracted to her, yeah, there's a lot worse implication there than Buddy Complex ever seemed to give a damn about. Thus, while Cross-Anj is more graphic with its depictions of sexism, abuse, and violence, that was its point. It actually fucking acknowledges that as bad, and treats such matters with the gravitas and seriousness they should, instead of seeking to dance around how horrific the acts depicted are. Thus, I respect it more than a series that refuses to, and seek to justify them, let alone intentionally and deliberately rob a character of her agency. Which I'll remind you, Cross-Ange canonically didn't.
But how
Give me whatever I crave? Sorry, but you can't win me over with presents. I won't become one of your dolls.
But with the game just doing that earlier with characters who canonically aren't, it doesn't seem as bad, even though it is worse. Like, Sunrise has done mind-screwed characters before, don't get me wrong. Everything Papyrus Shirako got away with in Zeta Gundam comes to mind. Hell, some consider Embryo just taking Shirako's characterization and escalating it to its ultimate end while better validating it. But when they depict a character like Hina have that done to them, they don't put the victim of mind-screwing in a situation that enables their potential sexual abuse by those with power over them. At least they didn't until Buddy Complex happened. It's like, what were you thinking? Were you thinking? Suffice it to say, Alba is not happy about this when he learns of it when they assault the cannon and call out Bison enslaving her. Which is kind of my point with regards to character agency. This is done in Buddy Complex deliberately to make Hina be a character that is saved from this strait. But with Cross-Ange, all the cast members end up ultimately throwing off Stupid Hair's attempts to brainwash them on their own, in ways that fit their characterization. And it's also not to say you can never ever do this with a female character. That's ridiculous. But the problem is Hina has only ever been depicted as a damsel Alba needs to save from the start of Buddy Complex's story, instead of someone who ended up deceived or in a dire strait that needs help. And that's the point where they stop being a character, but a story device. And Bison saying he's protecting her from Alba, while at the same time repeatedly ordering Hina to do only as he says? That's the tip-off for this and how Buddy Complex turned Bison and Alba's conflict into two children in a sandbox fighting over a doll. Defeat Hina's unit and it forces a decoupling that successfully purges Bison's influence over her. And after waking up, oh my yes, does Hina now have more than enough reason to defect from Zogilla, which would not have happened had Bison not done what he did. Either of them. They're the ones who crossed the line. Exampled by Dr. Han, who did this to Hina to begin with, letting Bison know he has override devices in his unit that can force a coupling. Which once more serves the fucking point of how awful this back and forth is. As the way to override the override is to force Hina to choose Alba to voluntarily couple with. And thanks to the memory sharing aspect of the device, Hina, who at this point had acknowledged her amnesia, has Alba's idea of Hina imprinted onto her, which is where the death of personality problem of this type of system rears its head again, as it makes it less about Hina deciding she may like him more, but making her believe that's what she should be instead of that being her choice. Which, hey, might have come about from being able to understand one on a psychic level, if it were not for the complication of the time travel plot that makes Hina being into Alba a preordained conclusion that Hina from her perspective of time has not yet reached. So she obviously must like him to complete this cycle, and she must have Alba's interpretation of her mapped onto her without her coming to those decisions on her own. Once again, robbing her of the agency of choice in the matter, which is the entire reason she was defecting from Zogilla to begin with. Then the story here goes completely off the rails, as when Hina rejects him for the final time, Bison boosts his capabilities by coupling with an AI copy of himself. Yeah, that don't work. The entire idea of the coupling system is to allow it to connect multiple individuals in a battle together so they can all coordinate in tandem. So it really doesn't make sense to then have it boost a pilot's capabilities to sync them with an AI of their own units. I mean, yeah, there's something to be said about a living person having the burden of thought in a battle situation lifted from them by linking up with an AI that can do such for them, but that doesn't make sense with how the coupling system has been described in it requiring active neural patterns to interface with. If they could just do it with an AI the entire time, then what's the point? In fact, it makes it no different than how the White Fang and Gundam Wing repurposed the Zero system to act as a control interface for all the mobile doll forces with a living human directed to the AI-driven mobile suits. And frankly, they did that better in Gundam Wing. I'm actually grateful Selric comes in all mad at everything going on, as they showcase how their actions have made everything so much worse by involving all these idiots. Though it's not like he would ever acknowledge his or the Keeper's own culpability, and why he appears angry in this stage is not explained, which breaks from his dominating, controlled character before, beyond his pre-presented envy of Amory's capabilities. But it is a welcome distraction nonetheless, padding out Alba and Hina pulling off their own universalized Valley Answer team attack, with Hina being the unit to deal the final blow against her abuser that she just can't help but thank before doing so.
Alba! 力を貸して！
今行くぞヒナ。どんな相手でも。
青葉となら。
やってみせる。
ありがとう、青葉。
認めない。俺はヒナを。
Unfortunately, the Zogillan officers see the way the battle is turning and fire the half-charged cannon before it can be completely destroyed. But that only serves to overload the damaged gun, which ends up opening a quantum singularity. Black hole. They opened up an artificial black hole. Somehow. And here's where we, again, need to address how bad writers can be when it involves time travel. As, for some reason, some idiots got it in their heads that black holes can be used for time travel, which some writers have used ever since. And it's like, how? How do you travel back in time using something that is just a supermassively dense object whose gravity breaks the literal math of the universe? You can use black holes to move someone forward in time, but that is because time as we observe it slows down in proximity to a black hole due to how strong the gravity well is. So you're not really time traveling by using one. The time dilation effect makes it so someone in proximity to it is experiencing time at such a ridiculously slower rate that once they escape or are rescued from the gravity well, normal time is just advanced so much that you are by default in the future!
Time.
Flies.
Time.
Bandits.
Time.
Wounds all healed.
Time.
Rosemary and time's up.
You are quite a simple organism to possess the knowledge you do.
You're only saying that because you don't know me.
Time is meaningless, and yet it is all that exists.
Very Morrissey.
What this should actually be is a wormhole, a spatial anomaly that exists in extra-dimensional space that does not follow the normal relationship nor flow with relativistic space-time. Wormholes, because of this, are more openly used as a means of explaining time travel because they're not part of normal space. But much like black holes being used for travel back time travel, wormholes are commonly confused with black holes for these sorts of plots, and no one seems to understand why that started happening. And this isn't just a Japanese anime series problem either, though I could cite Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, which is the earliest instance I can recall of this confusion occurring. Hell, this also happened in Kamen Rider Build. But this showed up in the Arrowverse Flash series. This showed up in Power Rangers Dino Charge and Ninja Steel, where the black hole the Dino Charge team created, which caused the genocide of their world, was retconned into being a wormhole. That planet is still dead, by the way. Hell, there is a Sci-Fi Channel original movie from the 2000s called Black Hole, and that black hole in that film acted more like a wormhole. But yeah, the Nectar Cannon blowing up, that's what opens that original time portal that threw Bison and Hina into the past, and created their purported causality loop, which as I've discussed before doesn't work, as there needs to be a stable point of origin for the loop even inside the loop, and Alba's actions do not facilitate that. Strangely enough, in X though, somehow the Zero system is used to subvert the loop, Hiro and Alba intervening on Bison and Hina falling into the singularity, making it so neither of them go back to the past to begin with. But then that begs the question on how Alba's even here, and how the personal timelines of everyone here that is contingent on Alba having been here before have not been changed. Well, obviously it's because this all occurs on Alworth. But if this all occurs on Alworth, then that means that them coming to Alworth was also part of the time loop. Thus, they'd be influenced by it, meaning Alba should still cease to exist here, which would change time, so interventions with Hina never happen, and she remains a loyal Zogilla soldier, when then should lead to them falling into the time warp, and Alba being attacked as a civilian, leading to him falling into the singularity in the past, and thus...
I hate temporal mechanics.
Again, as I have explained, there are ways to make this work, and the sole thing they needed to do is have young Hina originate from Alba's time, get poured into the future alongside him, raise in Zogilla, have the rest of the show's events happen, and then after Hina saves Alba in the past, have reported back to the future to complete and exit her parts of the loop, which they were just not aware of until now, as there would have been no way for them to know. After all, we're not exactly done with Bison as an antagonist yet, and we still now have his own future version in the picture, only with him now being a time paradox duplicate that makes things even worse as he literally cannot exist. Like, screw Alba still being in the future and everyone's memory unchanged, there is now an entire extra person beyond just Hina that now has no point of origin for him.
Paradox resolved.
For future Bison is revealed as the one among the Zogilla forces that has openly embraced the Keeper's assistance in his own plans, central to which being breaking the time loop so he could escape that, even though he already had, and tried to create a branching parallel universe timeline which, yeah, causal time loops in principle prevent the propagation of branched timelines. The concepts between them are fundamentally incompatible. If paralleling branched timelines were in play in this, then the loop would have never started, and Hina would have had her origin be as someone that was brought in from a paralleling universe to explain her origin points, with all the temporal changes then instead being recursive changes that have no need of a time loop to propagate them to begin with. Just as ludicrous is the idea that Embryo himself was the guy that set in motion the time loop Bison was stuck in as one of his own experiments, and Zogilla only cooperated with him so as for Bison to find a way out of the loop, which the Keepers helped facilitate as they hated Embryo too. But once again, that ain't something Embryo can do, and goes back to my thesis on Cross-Edge repeatedly being screwed over to facilitate the stories which X has no justifiable reason to make it act in service to. But yeah, they're blaming Buddy Complex's central story failings on a character that has nothing to do with them. That's not how you handle story amalgamations. As well, Embryo has the God Complex to try and do something like that. Well, Embryo's entire modus operandi is that he's the Wizard of Oz. He literally can't. But yeah, future Bison's so grateful for the help in escaping his fate. Even though by the fact future him is here, he really didn't. The time loop from his perspective is already ended. Then he's going to continue helping the Keepers sow chaos so as to facilitate their own goals. Central to that being finally reclaiming Amuro and Sparrow. Which is where we're going to pick up next time, as unfortunately, we ran long again.